So there's a new NOS Feratu movie coming out. Have you heard anything about that?
I've seen a thumbnail with Willem Dafoe again.
Okay, yeah, that was the thing. Willem Dafoe already played the vampire from the original NOS Feratu in Shadow of the Vampire, is that what it was called?
I think so, yeah.
Which I remember being really cool, although I haven't seen it in a long time. But this time he's not playing the vampire. I don't know if it's still adapting Dracula, or if it's doing a completely new story, but it's being directed by the guy who directed The Witch and The Lighthouse, and he seems to be kind of a big name right now.
Well, I really enjoyed The Witch and The Lighthouse, so that's cool.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to it. But I thought it was funny that Willem Dafoe is in there again, and not playing a vampire. It does seem, I would say it seemed like a missed opportunity, but they already had him as a vampire, so I don't know.
Maybe there'll be a little in-joke.
I hope not.
With a laugh
It doesn't
track.
seem like the kind of director to do something like that. But anyway, that's at least something to look forward to.
And he can pull out that line from Spider-Man.
You know,
I'm something of a vampire myself. So what did you check out this month?
Well, we already did a video on Fallout, so the next thing I watched was a movie from 1960 called The Gallant Hours. This was about the Navy in World War II in the Pacific, and it took an interesting approach to being a war movie in that there were no battle scenes, there's no action really at all. It's entirely about the people making the decisions, and it specifically follows Admiral William Halsey Jr., who was played by James Cagney. And I don't think I've actually seen a James Cagney movie before, but he did a good job here. I appreciated the fact that the movie tried to be basically as realistic and accurate as it could. At least it seemed like it was trying to be really accurate. But as a movie, it made it somewhat dry and kind of boring. It's almost like a docudrama. It seemed like it was really trying to portray things as they happened and not exaggerate them or over-dramatize them or anything like that. But that didn't make for the best viewing experience. So I feel like really the people that would appreciate this movie are people that are all about the Pacific Theater in World War II. They would probably enjoy this a lot more than I did. I can definitely appreciate what they were going for. And for being a movie from 1960, I was impressed at that approach, but it wasn't for me. So I definitely didn't think it was bad, but I didn't really get a whole lot out of it. I did recognize a few actors from some Japanese sci-fi movies. You had the Japanese UN guy from the American version of King Kong vs. Godzilla playing an actual Japanese guy in this movie. You had Les Tremayne doing some narration, which he also did in the American version of King Kong vs. Godzilla. And you had Richard Jekyll, who was in The Green Slime, which I'm pretty sure I talked about before. I watched The IT Crowd Season 2, or Series 2, from 2007. More good stuff. I'm definitely glad I went back to the show and continued on with it. Again, 6 episodes. Go back to the previous video to hear me talk about that more, if you want to hear more about that. But I definitely like it. I watched The Return of Ultraman, which ran from 1971 to 1972 for 51 episodes. So pretty much a complete year.
Damn, it took him that long to get back?
Well, the Japanese title is kind of more like The Ultraman That Returned, but both of them are completely inaccurate because this is about a new Ultraman. It was originally going to be the same Ultraman actually returning, but then they said, hey, we can sell more toys if it's a new Ultraman. So they changed it at the last minute, literally, because they had already shot some of the first episode and they had to go back and reshoot it. I think this Ultraman design is the best out of all of them. I've looked at all the different designs over the years and I definitely like this one the most. It does look very similar to the original, but with some slight tweaks that I think are definite improvements. And it's the same basic concept where you have a team of people that fight monsters and one of them secretly transforms into Ultraman. What makes this one different a little bit is that instead of focusing entirely on those team members, the guy that becomes Ultraman actually has a civilian life. He works at a car repair shop. He works for the secret agent guy from Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, so that was kind of cool. And he has kind of a girlfriend, and then his girlfriend is the sister of the guy that he works for, and then they have a younger brother as well, who thankfully is not annoying, even though he is a kid. He's just another character. I talked about Ultra 7 having less kaiju than Ultraman, but having much better writing. And it's like they heard my comments because they brought back all the kaiju, but they kept the writing approach that they took with Ultra 7, so that was good. I think the big problem with this show is that it was too long. It was longer than the previous ones, and you could feel the writers starting to struggle partway through to come up with good stories, and they were struggling to come up with good monster designs. At first, the monsters were definitely an improvement from Ultra 7, but then they started getting kind of stupid again, and you could also feel that they were saying, it's hard coming up with an explanation for every monster, so let's just not do that, and just say a monster showed up, we have to go fight it. And I thought it was kind of funny that every time a monster shows up, they immediately go to attack it, even though in the past, some of them have turned out to be friendly. Their initial reaction is always, we're going to go kill this thing. The guy that plays Ultraman, the human half, is a pretty bad actor at the start of the show. I did think he got better as it went on, but it felt like a kid pretending to be an adult, and it was distracting and weird.
So, like Shazam.
It did make me think of Shazam. I haven't seen those movies, but Alex Ross recently put out, I think it was recent, some kind of painting showing all the different characters that have been influenced by Captain Marvel over the years, and Ultraman was on there, and it did make me think about it. One of my complaints about Ultra 7 was that they had the annoying hero music every time he would show up, and thankfully they didn't do that nearly as much in this show, although toward the end they seemed to bring it back, so that was annoying. And you could tell that they really liked what they came up with in terms of cinematography and lighting on the set and everything for doing battles that take place at dusk, because it does look really cool, and once they do that in an episode, it seemed like they started doing it in almost every episode, to the point that there was even an episode that was called Duel at Dusk or something like that. And you actually had Honda Ishiro directing a few episodes. He's the guy that directed the original Godzilla and a bunch of the early Godzilla movies. And the first, I think it was a two-parter at the beginning, was called Kaiju Shoshingeki, which is the Japanese title of Destroy All Monsters. So that was cool. And I knew this was the show where they brought Ultra 7 into the same continuity as Ultra Q and Ultraman. And I was looking forward to seeing how they were going to do that. I was hoping they were going to build out the universe a little bit, give some more depth to things. But of course, they just had Ultra 7 kind of show up in an episode and say, hey, Ultraman, you should probably not fly into the sun because you'll die. And then he's like, oh yeah. So then he doesn't fly into the sun. And then Ultra 7 just disappears. They did bring Ultra 7 and the original Ultraman together in a couple of episodes, but I honestly don't even remember what they did, so it must not have been that much. And I was hoping for more monsters returning also, but there were only 2 that returned from the original Ultraman. So pretty much every episode is still completely standalone. There's barely any continuity. There is a big kind of twist pretty late into the show, which I'm going to go ahead and spoil because it didn't have the impact that it really should have. Basically what they did was they killed off the girlfriend character and her brother that the Ultraman guy works for, and I didn't even realize that they were dead until the episode ended, and I said, wait, they never came out of their comas, and it turned out they were dead, and I didn't realize it. So clearly they could have done that a little better, and I actually looked it up to see why they did that. I thought maybe it was like an actor problem or something like that, a scheduling conflict, but they basically said that they wanted to introduce the concept of death to kids, to kind of give them a way of understanding it and being able to deal with it or something like that. But I think it was a huge mistake. It took away one of the more interesting elements of the show. They replaced those 2 characters with some other girl that is just there. I wasn't even sure who she was, but she just kind of started showing up, and she doesn't do anything. And I also thought it was funny that when it comes to the Monster Attack Team, the group that fights the monsters, they're literally called the Monster Attack Team, or MAT for short. They really only had they had 2 episodes focusing on specific members, and one of them was the second to last episode where they introduce all this backstory for this character and new side characters and stuff, and it's second to last episode. So they definitely could have done that earlier. So overall, I did like it. When it was good, it was probably my favorite out of these so far, but I have to admit I was starting to get burned out. It was just too long, too much of the same thing. I feel like I might have made this comparison before with Ultra 7, but watching these episodes is kind of like reading Silver Age DC comics. I like them, but you can only do so much at one time before you need to take a break and go do something else. So I'm going to take a break from Ultraman for a little while.
Because you're just overwhelmed with high-quality content and deep, intense storytelling.
Yeah, there's only so much I can process at one time.
There's only so many times you can watch Batman fight a gorilla.
Yes.
Who's about to take over the world. Oh, let me be clear. Not even a supervillain gorilla, just a regular gorilla from the zoo.
Yeah, the Silver Age was the era for gorillas. I watched The Edge of Destruction, which was the third Doctor Who serial from 1964. This one was only 2 episodes, and it reminded me a lot of the John Carpenter version of The Thing. Basically, at the end of the Daleks one, they were traveling through time or whatever, trying to get back home, and there was some kind of explosion that knocked them all out, and now when they wake up, they seem to be stuck inside the TARDIS. I can't remember why, but they think something has gotten inside, and it may be hiding inside one of them and taking control or something. So nobody trusts each other. Everybody thinks everybody else has ulterior motives or is, secretly trying to do whatever. And then you get your explanation, and I'm trying to remember what it was. My note just says it was incredibly lame. I can't remember if something actually got in or not, which tells you how memorable the explanation was. I know there was something that went wrong with the TARDIS, and basically it was that a button that the Doctor pushed got stuck. The spring got stuck and didn't push the button back up, and that was what caused the problem. So literally at the end, he's like, "Oh, I have to take the spring out and whatever."
That sounds very much like a Doctor Who thing.
I complained about the Daleks one feeling very drawn out. Even though this one was only 2 episodes, it still felt very drawn out. I thought it was interesting at first. It was intriguing. I wanted to see where things were going. But again, that explanation was really dumb. And the guy that played the Doctor, actually, I'm going to be accurate and say the guy that played Doctor Who, because I know that's going to piss people off, but that's what he's credited as. The guy that played Doctor Who flubbed a lot of his lines. And at one point I was wondering if he was doing it on purpose, but I don't think he was. And it was pretty distracting. But I guess they just had to keep their schedule going, so they just kept shooting and just left it all in there. So yeah, pretty disappointing, but at least it was only 2 episodes. And honestly, it was more interesting than the Daleks one for me. I watched Moby Dick, the 1998 2-part TV adaptation.
Who's in that one?
Well, I'm about to tell you, because that's the only interesting thing about it. Last month I talked about the 50s version, which had Gregory Peck as, I almost said as Moby Dick, as Captain Ahab, and Orson Welles as the preacher that shows up early on. This one brought back Gregory Peck to play the preacher, and he did a much better job in here than he did as Ahab. And this time you have Patrick Stewart playing Captain Ahab, which I was very intrigued to see how that was going to play out, what he was going to do with it, because watching through TNG and other things that he's in, he can be really good, and I thought he could do a lot with this.
Yeah, interesting choice to be on a TV adaptation in 1998, so he was already a big name.
And I was very disappointed. It never felt like he had a firm grasp on the character. It felt like he was just kind of reading the lines and following the direction. And maybe it was a problem with the direction and not with him. I don't know. I didn't look into the background of the show or of the movie or miniseries or whatever you'd call it. But Ahab's intensity never felt authentic. It always felt like acting and not particularly good acting. So that was surprising and disappointing. Other than that, you had Henry Thomas playing Ishmael, and I complained about his acting in The Fall of the House of Usher when he was trying to be comedic, and it did not work. And he's also really bad in here, where, just like the 50s version, they completely removed all of Ishmael's personality, turned him into a super flat, boring character, and his acting in this movie comes off like a high schooler in a play who doesn't want to be in the play, or doesn't really know what acting is, but is trying to do it anyway. It really doesn't work. He especially struggles with feeling like he fits the period. And so does Ted Levine, who was Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs. In here, he also feels very out of place, and he talks pretty much the same way he does in Silence of the Lambs, which was distracting when things are supposed to be more serious and he's having these discussions with Ahab about how he's crazy and they have to turn around and stop going on this crazy mission and whatever. And I just kept imagining him, in Silence of the Lambs. It was distracting.
I'm imagining him as Captain Stottlemyre from Monk. saying those things.
I didn't realize that was him in Monk until I looked him up. And yeah, now I kind of, it made me want to go back and watch Monk, because I used to watch that back in the day.
Ahab, gotta turn around.
See, I kept thinking of him saying, like, Moby Dick, is that a great big fat whale? It was distracting the entire way through. Then you had Drake from Blade Trinity, who is in there for some reason. You had Immortan Joe, a.k.a. the Toe Cutter from the Mad Max movies, who was cool. I did like him in here. You had Bruce Spence from the Mad Max movies.
This is such a weird cast for this movie.
Yes. And I'm pretty sure Patrick Stewart stuck in a Mad Max reference. And I assume he did it on his own. Because, in the first Mad Max, when the Knight Rider is doing his thing at the beginning, and he says, like, do you see me, Toe Cutter? Do you see me, man? He says it in a kind of a distinct way.
Yeah.
Captain Ahab says the same thing when he sees Moby Dick in this big storm, and he's talking to his men, and he's like, do you see him? Do you see him there, man? Something like that. It reminded me of something immediately, and I was sitting there. I had to pause the movie, and I was trying to think of what it was, and I realized it was Mad Max. So I'm pretty sure he did that on purpose. The guy that played Queequeg was much better than the guy in the 50s one. They actually got a Pacific Islander, which I don't know if that's what Queequeg was actually supposed to be. I don't remember. But he was pretty good. But again, they took out almost all of the humor. And Queequeg is a source of a lot of the humor in the book when he is there. The book doesn't really focus on the characters very much. It's mostly Ishmael describing things and talking about things and thinking about things. And again, Henry Thomas's version in this movie is just a very flat, dull character. So all of that is gone. There was more blood than I expected from a TV movie of the time, pretty much when they're stabbing the whales and stuff like that, which some of those effects, well, first of all, there's definitely some bad CGI, especially toward the end. You don't see Moby Dick all that much. He's not in the book all that much either, but he does show up at the end. The ending went on for way too long, of him destroying the boats and everything. Spoiler. But yeah, whenever they stab the whales, they do almost like a close-up shot of the spear going in or the harpoons going in. And it's weird because it seems like they're like static shots, but they're supposed to be, swimming through the water and everything.
Well, in 98, just be happy that it wasn't early CGI.
Yeah. And the other thing that was especially bad and distracting, probably the worst thing about it, was the audio. There were a lot of instances where lines were re-recorded in a way that did not match the performance, and there were a lot of really distracting stock sound effects used throughout. And that whole aspect, the whole audio side of things, felt especially weird because it felt like a high production movie for a TV movie and everything, but then you have such bad audio. So that was weird. Overall, it was definitely better than the 50s one, and not because it was longer, not because it was able to put in more that was in the book, because it's still... I don't know if I said this when I talked about the 50s one, but I don't see an adaptation of the book really being possible in an authentic way, because, again, the book doesn't focus on the characters. It doesn't focus on the events. The majority of it is the stuff in between, with just Ishmael thinking about things and making connections and stuff. And you couldn't do that in a movie without just being nothing but narration. I mean, I could see maybe somebody like Terrence Malick doing something interesting, maybe, but I wouldn't really want to see it. I don't know. I guess I would want to see Terrence Malick do a Moby Dick movie. That would be interesting. But I don't see a good adaptation being possible because it's just not that kind of thing. So yeah, overall, I would say skip it.
So I'm just imagining Patrick Stewart pulling another one from Silence of the Lambs, and he's looking at the whale. He's going, "Would you f*** me? I'd f*** me so hard."
Okay, well, that would have made it more interesting. So that's everything I watched. I read the next 3 volumes of Yotsuba, so volumes 2, 3, and 4. I talked about the first volume last month. I tried to find the next volumes of that Kamen Rider manga, and I have not succeeded. And I sold the 3 volumes that I had read the first time. But I'm glad I found these Yotsuba volumes because I like this series a lot. I was already recommending it with volume 1, but I would recommend it even more highly now. It's super funny. I really appreciate that all of the characters are so distinct and have their own personalities and their own quirks, and they're all sources of humor in their own ways, because I feel like it would have been way too easy to just be, and I thought it was going to be, all about Yotsuba and her reactions to things and then people's reactions to her. But it's at the point now where, well, pretty much the whole time, all the characters have their own, I wouldn't call them subplots, but they feel like they're living their own lives. And all of their individual aspects play off of each other really well. And like I said, they're all sources of humor in their own way. And you do get more characters as it goes on. There was one chapter in volume 4, I think, that I didn't like. It went on for way longer than most of the other ones for some reason. And it was all about fishing. And it went pretty, I don't know if in-depth is right, but it definitely went too far into actual fishing stuff. And I just did not find it interesting. It was a slog to get through that chapter for me. And again, I'm reading it in Japanese, so I can't read it as fast as I could in English anyway. So I didn't like that, but everything else I like a lot. I especially like whenever Yotsuba gets into an argument with an adult, which happens surprisingly often, I would say. And it's always funny because she's like 5 or 6, and seeing a little girl challenging adults and then having the adults have to come down to her level in order to, I don't know, fight back. It's really funny, really amusing. So yeah, I would definitely highly recommend it. I think it's the only manga I've ever talked about on this channel. I've mentioned like Ito Junji and how much I like his stuff, but I don't think I've talked about reading any of it here. So it doesn't mean a whole lot when I say it's one of my favorite manga at this point. I really haven't read that much, but I would definitely recommend it. And it's one that's kid-friendly too, so if you want to get your kids into manga or whatever, it's a really, really good option, I think.
I mean, I would say Junji Ito fits that too. I talked about Black Paradox. You could watch my little summary on that. That's great for kids.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, depending on the kids, I would give some of his stuff to certain kids, certain of his things.
I'm starting to understand why your kids are like your kids and my kids are like my kids.
Anyway, that's everything I did this month. So what did you check out?
I watched Spectre from 2015, which is a James Bond movie that takes place right after Skyfall, which came out in 2012. And really, after how much I liked Skyfall, this one was quite a letdown. Skyfall had decent writing for a James Bond movie and a strong emotional charge. And this one fell back to Pierce Brosnan era stuff, but it was shot in a modern 2010s style. Actually, some of it even felt like Roger Moore era. You basically have Jaws, but it's Dave Bautista, and instead of metal jaws, I think he has metal fingernails or something. At the very least, he doesn't talk, and he's virtually indestructible.
What's his name?
Mr. Hinks. That's Hinx.
Okay. I mean, I was hoping it was just going to be fingers or something, but that's good too, I guess.
Nails would have worked.
Yeah.
Even the story felt thrown together, which was also a bummer after Skyfall. So basically everything that has happened to Daniel Craig during his era has been orchestrated by Christoph Waltz as Blofeld. All of these villains, he's like, yeah, they've all been working for me, which is such a lazy-ass thing. And they try to provide more of a background to Blofeld than, well, he's that guy with the eye and the cat. But it goes way too far and is just ridiculous.
Is it still Sam Mendes directing?
Yeah, he originally was not going to come back, but then decided to. And I love the reasons why for people behind and in front of the camera, they finally decided to come back. And it's usually just because they were offered enough money. I don't know the actual reason he said he decided to do another one, but I'm sure it was they just said, we'll give you more money.
Yeah.
And up until now, I was interested in this movie because whenever a Bond collection shows up included on a streaming service, this one is always missing.
Interesting.
And it was finally included, so I said, all right. But then I watched it, and I wasn't missing that much, which is too bad, because Spectre and Blofeld are, Bond's arch nemesis and organization, so it's kind of lame how it just turned out.
I just looked up Skyfall. So you liked Skyfall then?
I did.
I remember thinking it was super boring. So there's my review of Skyfall. I watched half of it. I remember I had to leave, but it was just a bonus that I didn't have to stick around for the second half.
I watched Starship Troopers from 1997.
Okay.
And I read Starship Troopers, written in 1959.
Okay.
The movie is such a Paul Verhoeven movie, and the book is not. I've never read the book before. I've seen the movie a bunch of times. Okay, so let's talk about this. In my opinion, outside of the main character having the same name, being in the military, and there being a war against big alien bugs, practically everything is different, not the least of which is the tone of both.
Correct.
I like the book a lot more.
Okay. I like them both a lot. I know they had a script that they were already going to make before they realized that they could get the rights to the book. And when they realized that, they kind of made some changes to try to stick in some stuff from the book.
And I think I read something somewhere where Paul Verhoeven said, yeah, I read like the first chapter.
Yeah, he was not interested in the book.
That's an interesting approach.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't like the movie as an adaptation of the book.
Yeah.
But it's kind of the same thing where I would say that's not really a book that lends itself to a movie.
I think it could. The book is very focused on Rico's life and what happens. And the movie, Rico is just a small part of the story.
Yeah, but I feel like the book doesn't have a strong plot, really. It's more kind of just an excuse for contemplation about different military situations, I guess.
Well, yeah, anytime Rico's instructors are talking to them, that's Heinlein directly.
Yeah, pretty much.
Spouting out all his philosophical stuff, which is how a stranger in a strange land felt too. But in the book, way more happens over the course of Rico's narration, and it's way less wink wink nudge nudge than the movie.
That's true.
And even the characters, a bunch of characters that are super prominent in the movie, barely show up in the book.
Yeah, they definitely changed a lot of the character. I mean, they combined characters and, I don't know, just like you were saying, just use names to fit characters that they already had for the movie, basically.
Yeah, the Denise Richards character in the movie is this huge part of Rico's life. And in the book, I think she showed up in like 3 sentences.
Yeah, she's there at the very beginning. And then she shows up in one scene later that's like, yeah, not very long.
And all he says was, she looked really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was really surprised too when Rico encountered his father, who had also enlisted, and they ended up fighting together or whatever.
Yeah, that's completely the opposite of the movie.
Right.
Both his father's personality and attitude, and then the fact that his father dies in the movie before anything happens.
I really liked in the book how everything was from Rico's perspective and how he could only speak from what he knew based on his experiences. And when he didn't know something, he just said, I don't know about that. But as he gained more knowledge, that was reflected not just in his retelling of events, but how in-depth his analysis of those events was. It was cool to see his character actually grow over the course of the book.
I agree. I really like the fact that he is not important. He's just some random guy.
Right.
And I would contrast it with something like Old Man's War by John Scalzi, which was definitely influenced to at least some degree by Starship Troopers. And what I don't like about that book is that the protagonist, it does the thing where he's the one that figures out every single thing along the way. And, you know, he's the one that succeeds at doing everything. He's the hero. Whereas Johnny Rico really is just a grunt and never becomes anything else.
My name is Ford Baseball America, and I'm the only one who can stop Godzilla.
Even in the movie, like, Rico takes out the big tanker bug when he jumps on its back. I don't know. I guess, like, at the end, you know, he's at least involved with capturing the brain bug, even if he's not the one who actually does it. But I feel like the movie is, to at least some extent, is kind of trying to satirize American action movies.
Yeah.
With how everybody's just kind of shooting from the hip and they're all about, you know, the super gung-ho, let's just go in and shoot everything. That's their strategy. I find the movie really depressing, but also really funny, which is clearly intended.
Yeah. I liked Rico's description of their armor suits in the book because it was really in-depth, but it wasn't, this is how they work, because he didn't know how they worked. He's like, yeah, the scientists designed it. They know how they work. Instead, it was, this is how you use it the most effectively, which is a totally different thing.
Yeah, it felt like a very realistic way of describing things without having to run the risk of trying to explain it from kind of a mechanical standpoint where you'd then have to actually figure out how you would build something like that. So I think it was a really smart approach.
Yeah, me too. And I liked in the movie when he's in basic training and he's about to resign because his actions got somebody killed. And in the movie, only a couple people have resigned, and it's this huge taboo thing. But right at that moment, the bugs attack, and they go to war and stuff. But in the book, hundreds and hundreds of people resign throughout basic training because they just can't handle it. It's just a regular thing. Because he's like, we went from 2,000 people, and now we're down to like 26.
Yeah.
And once he gets out of that training, he's like, yeah, it turns out we've already been at war for a couple of years.
Again, the movie making it super personal. The place that gets hit is Johnny Rico's home. Everything ties back to him in the movie.
Yeah. I also liked in the book how the bugs were written way more intelligently.
Yeah, I mean, in the movie they have the brain bug, but
Yeah, but see, that's the other thing. In the book, there's no big reveal of, we suspect there's a brain bug. They're like, yeah, we know that. There's even levels above that. The whole thing was much more straightforward.
I mean, the book is definitely a lot more,
Matter of fact.
yeah, but also more realistic, I guess, where the movie is trying to set up this specific situation to kind of point out the things it wants to point out about, society and stuff.
Yeah, the movie was this big, flashy, abridged reimagining of the book.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I don't like the movie, I do. I was just not expecting the source material to be presented so differently. I watched The Perfect Host from 2010. This is a movie where David Hyde Pierce is prepping a dinner party, and a random dude cons his way into Pierce's house by saying they're both friends of Julia, when in reality, the dude just rifled through Pierce's mail and found a postcard from Julia. And it turns out that he's not so much a con man as a bank robber, and he's looking to hide out. So once the jig is up, he holds Pierce at gunpoint and demands that he call his dinner guests and cancel. But then he passes out, and it turns out that David Hyde Pierce is a psychopath, and he's hallucinating all of his dinner guests. His real game is he kidnaps and drugs people and tortures them to death over the course of the night. So now this bank robber is his latest victim. It's a battle of wills type movie, but there's also a good chunk of humor thrown in. So we find out more about each of them as the night goes on, like why the dude chose to rob the bank, who David Hyde Pierce really is, lots of twists and turns everywhere. It wasn't the worst movie I've ever seen, but I probably wouldn't recommend it. It was an interesting idea, but making a whole movie out of it without more substance didn't really work. Unless you want to see David Hyde Pierce do a really goofy dance routine by himself to no music. No judgment on my part if that's your thing.
I mean, I'm kind of intrigued by that, so we'll see.
I watched Old from 2021.
Good. That way I won't have to. I can just hear what you're going to say.
Yeah. This is a movie by M. Night Shyamalan based on a French graphic novel.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Where a beach inexplicably causes people to age at the rate of 1 year per 30 minutes. First off, this was a way better movie than that one he did where someone in the elevator is the devil. Secondly, that was not a high bar to clear, and this one still didn't do that much. The main negative of this movie is that it was too long for the idea. He set up all the dominoes, but it only took 30 minutes to knock them down, even though the movie was 2 hours long. And he tried to compensate by throwing in all of these different characters with different personalities and personal conflicts, and had them bounce off of each other, but they were also cartoony and one-dimensional that it didn't feel realistic or interesting at all. It would be like dropping down 10 aliens that were 10 different colors on a planet and having them go, I'm red, I'm blue, I'm green. Could we be any more different? These characters suffer from M. Night Shyamalan's dialogue skills, so it's very painful. People do not talk like that. Half of their words were straight exposition of what was going on as it was going on. Like, I'm watching the movie. I see it happening. And what's worse, you'll have characters state right after these events, this is how I feel about that event that just happened. And somebody else will go, this is how I feel about it. And some of it we agree with, and some of it we don't. Conflict. It took me right out of the movie, out of my house, down the street, dropped me off in the middle of some alley, where I woke up and said, damn, what just happened? He wants his movies to be multifaceted, and he can do it. I genuinely enjoy some of his earlier stuff. But once he ran out of ideas strong enough to do on his own and refused to let anyone else collaborate in the writing process, it fell apart, and here we are. It's very frustrating because there are those good moments buried in there. They're just surrounded by so much crap that you can't stand it. And what's even worse, the reason why the beach rapidly ages people is so lame. And the reason people are exploiting it is just as lame. And I think in the graphic novel, they don't explain it, which would have been a way better decision because that's not the point of why it's happening. even the premise of all these people showing up to the beach is such a Twilight Zone episode, and not one of the good ones. Wow, this place is too good to be true. Can you believe we all won a random internet contest to this all-expense-paid $1 million private resort with no strings attached? LOL.
Okay, well, it all sounds better than I expected.
I think the worst/best part was this one woman who has low calcium in her bones, and she doesn't have her medication, and she's aging so fast. So her bones are becoming more and more brittle. And there's this one part where she's crawling through this tunnel to chase these kids, and her bones are all comically CGI breaking as she's rolling around, and she's screaming and just keeps crawling after them and becoming more and more contorted. It was so dumb. It's supposed to be very scary and serious, but it was, man. Oh.
Is it radiation? Is that the explanation?
No.
Okay.
And then the ending is supposed to be this very cathartic thing. Kind of like at the end of Signs, you know, when the kid turns out to have not inhaled the poison. Sorry, I just spoiled Signs for everybody. But that family dynamic had been built up over the movie. You know, so the emotional release actually had some impact. Mm-hmm. He tried to do the same thing in this movie, but it was so dumb and you didn't care about anything. I mean, you can throw in as much James Newton Howard fancy emotional release music as you want, but if the movie sucked, then it doesn't do anything. So I'm just looking forward to the next one, where people in an elevator inexplicably age. As we go up, we get older. As we go down, we get younger.
Oh, what a good idea.
M. Night Shyamalan. Levels.
So would you recommend it?
That huge pause was me thinking about it.
Because, I mean, it sounds like a good, bad movie.
Yeah, I guess if you're watching it that way. If there was some person who condensed everything via YouTube, it would probably be more tolerable. I watched Fire in the Sky from 1993.
Is this the one with the Liquid Terminator? I can't think of his name.
Yes, Robert Patrick.
I've seen parts of it. I don't think I've ever seen the whole thing.
This is an alien abduction movie with Robert Patrick and the guy who played Terry in the Spawn live-action movie. I don't know his name.
Okay.
These 6 guys are loggers, and one night only 5 of them come back, and they claim to the authorities that the 6th guy was killed/abducted by aliens. And obviously no one believes them, and the whole town thinks that these 5 guys just murdered him, despite Robert Patrick being his best friend. So it's all suspicion and investigations and lie detector tests and whatnot. But a week later, the guy shows up again, and he's naked, scarred, and scared. And they try to reacclimate him to society and get things back to the way they were. And despite this being an alien abduction movie, the least amount of focus is spent on the alien abduction. There are 3 plot balls that this movie tries to keep in the air. The town's reaction to this guy's disappearance and how they treat the 5 remaining guys. Robert Patrick's own guilt for abandoning his friend out of fear. And the third one is what actually happened to the guy. And unfortunately, the movie cannot juggle all 3 of these balls successfully. It was really too bad because this movie could have been a lot better. Adding more runtime would not have been practical. So what they should have done is cut the fat out of what they had. There was too much story for too short of runtimes. Basically the opposite of Old. The relationship stuff and the town stuff was the part with the most meat. And it was the most interesting. The investigation should have died off way sooner than it did, but it just kept interjecting itself into the movie without contributing anything new or worthwhile. And the ending felt very unfulfilling. It was like they said, damn, we wanted to tell so much more about these people, but we don't have time. So let's just skip way far ahead and tell you what we had planned for an ending.
I wonder how much of that might have been influenced by the fact that it was based on true events, supposedly.
Right, and I did read up a little bit on that, and the guy who it supposedly happened to was disappointed with the movie because he said this isn't at all what happened. But the people making the movie said, yeah, your version of what actually happened was so boring. Nobody would watch that.
When I was a kid, I was obsessed with UFOs and stuff. I was basically like Mulder. So I don't remember the details at this point, but I remember this was a big case that was always popping up in UFO documentaries and alien stuff. So I don't know. That's surprising to hear, I guess.
Well, to me, what was surprising was the smallest chunk of the movie was dedicated to the abduction stuff. Because again, this movie was really about the relationship between Robert Patrick, the dude, and the town, which was an interesting take and one I really liked. And even though the smallest chunk was about the abduction stuff, it really got the point across. So in the last 15 minutes or so, Terry has a flashback to what happened once he was pulled up into the UFO. And it was very intense, very sharp, especially for 1993. I think ILM did the special effects, and the cinematographer for this movie was Bill Pope, which was probably one of the reasons why it was so vivid.
Who's Bill Pope? I know the name.
Yeah, he's done Sam Raimi stuff, Dark Man, Army of Darkness, Spider-Man 2. He did the 3 Matrix movies. He did Scott Pilgrim, Baby Driver.
Okay.
He's done newer stuff too. I think he did the most recent Ant-Man.
So some good stuff, and then also the Matrix movies.
I knew you were going to say that. That's why I said that. I think those few minutes in the UFO is what most people remember this movie for. It was very uncomfortable, and I think a big part of why it really worked for me was how routine and almost carelessly the aliens treat his whole experience. Even though for him, it's the most terrifying and horrible thing that has ever happened to him. It was a very, very effective scene.
I do remember seeing either a clip from that or some shots or something, probably in some kind of special effects group that I follow or something on Facebook or something. And it did make me want to go and watch the movie because I've never seen that part of it.
It's at the very end, pretty much, because maybe it was a studio decision where they said, I thought this movie was about aliens. You gotta show some alien stuff.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Very graphic. Having trouble sleeping. And the last thing I watched, which I was the most excited about, was a live stream of a concert, The Music of Mother, from this year, which was a 30th anniversary celebration of Mother 2, which is my favorite game of all time, and it was released in the States as Earthbound. Didn't even come out in Europe. And I can talk about this game all day. I know I've talked about it on this channel before, but I'm not going to do that right now. So, Shigesato Itoi, the director and creator of the series, decided to do a live stream celebrating the music of Mother and Mother 2 with the 2 main composers, Keiichi Suzuki and Hirokazu Tanaka. So you got these 3 old guys who decided to come together and do this thing just on the music, which was awesome. So it started with Tanaka doing an electronic set, which he's been doing for quite some time, and they're always really good sets. And the fact that this was Mother 2 based made it even better. Like, I have his albums. I was pumped when his first original album came out back in, that was 2017, but it's still really good. And his set was awesome. It was very clean. It was very crisp, very creative. That was unintentionally alliterative. I didn't mean to do that, but I'm just that good, I guess.
Uh-huh.
And then that was followed up by this huge discussion between the 3 of them about the series in general. And unfortunately, that was not subtitled, so I do not know what they were talking about. But I was very happy to see that as a surprise, Itoi had invited Shogo Sakai, who did the music for Mother 3, to join in with them. It was a nice nod. And I'm hoping that Shmuplations or Legends of Localizations takes the time to translate this discussion, because I really, really want to know what they were saying. And then there was this weird intermission while Suzuki was setting everything up, where Toby Fox came in virtually for a few minutes talking about how great the music of Mother was, which we all know, that's why we were watching the live stream. And it was very, very out of place. And then the finish was Suzuki and this mini band playing a live acoustic set of music from the series. And to me, this part felt very unpolished. It was experimental, which was not surprising, but it was like the whole group was not really locked in. And for some of it, it seemed like they were playing partly with pre-recorded tracks too. I'm not sure, but it felt like a practice jam session instead of the performance jam session. I'm not complaining too much, because seeing the composer go through his own stuff for a really good soundtrack, for a really good game, is awesome. And I've never paid any money for anything like this, because I've never encountered anything like this in this format that interested me. But as soon as I heard about this, I could not register for this thing fast enough. It was great. I am really glad Itoi decided to do it. Best thing I saw all month.
And you saw Old, so dang.
Ha ha ha. I read Starship Troopers, and I read You Like It Darker from 2024, which is a very recent collection of short stories by Stephen King. And as is typical of his short story books, they range from really good to pretty forgettable to not great. Most of these have already been published in some way, shape, or form over the past few years, but, you know, in like ebooks and magazines and stuff, so I have not read them. Do you read any magazines?
I collect G-Fan magazine, which is a Godzilla fan magazine, but that's about it.
Do you get those mixed up with your G-String magazines?
Well, actually, no. You know what? Well, okay, let me answer that question. No, well, the answer is no. There are a lot of good magazines out there on movies.
Oh, man. Okay, I thought you were going to go the other way.
No, really, because I mean, so I used to work at a bookstore, and I would look at the movie magazines sometimes, and some of them are good. Film Facts had some good articles on some Harryhausen stuff. I don't know. There's a lot of there are a decent number of good magazines that cover older stuff, because I mean that's what I'm looking for. There are way more magazines still being published than most people would think.
Two of the bigger stories in this book are Danny Coughlin's Bad Dream and Rattlesnakes. And Rattlesnakes is a sequel novella to Cujo, except it is set decades later, where the dad from Cujo is the only one out of the family still alive. He's in his 70s, which did not need to be a sequel to Cujo. It was a standalone story, but then Stephen King just said, hey, what if the main guy was actually dad from Cujo, but he was like 70?
That sounds like a Stephen King thing to do.
Yeah, very much so. The story wasn't bad. It was classic Stephen King. And Danny Coughlin's Bad Dream felt like a Holly Gibney spin-off, standalone type thing. And it was interesting. The supernatural side of that story took a back seat to the ramifications of what the supernatural events caused. A few of the bad stories that felt like EC Vault of Horror stories. So yeah, that's a pretty good comparison. Were The Fifth Step, Willy the Weirdo, which even sounds like a Vault of Horror story title.
Yeah, again, it sounds like a Stephen King title.
Red Screen and The Turbulence Expert. Those were super short. They had practically no development. Felt like a few sentences jotted down of drafts of ideas, but they somehow made it into the finished book. I really liked The Dreamers, which is a Lovecraftian story about breaking through into another universe that reminded me a lot of The Jaunt, which is another one of his short stories that I really like.
That's what I thought of as soon as you said that.
That story's so good. And that one's really short, so it's not like he can't make really good short stories. And I actually haven't finished the book. I have one more to read, so maybe I'll talk about that next month. I played RollerCoaster Tycoon from 1999, which I played the hell out of back in the day. And as soon as I started again, I just could not stop. I'm actually playing it through OpenRCT2, which is, I'm pulling this from Wikipedia, an open source re-implementation of RollerCoaster Tycoon 2. So basically, it allows you to play RollerCoaster Tycoon 1 and 2 on modern hardware.
Okay, when you started that, I thought you were going to say I've actually been playing it this whole time that we've been talking, something like that.
I wish. Hearing you talk about Moby Dick and whatever. So OpenRCT2 is free, but it requires you to have the original game files of RollerCoaster Tycoon 1 and 2. So you do have to pay for those, and you can get those files via Steam or GOG. Is that how you say it? Or do people say GOG?
I say GOG, but I don't know.
You can even have the original CDs. CDs are how we used to play games. You had to, put them in. I'm saying that for our younger viewers, which we don't have any, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, most of our viewers are at least as old as us.
There are a bunch of quality of life improvements and tweaks to the original games, and I've just been having a blast. RollerCoaster Tycoon was so far ahead of its time. It is so damn polished for being a PC game from that long ago. Highly recommended if you enjoy simulation or building games. It is crazy to think that one dude did both of these games by himself, in assembly language no less. I cannot give enough praise to him or these games. And you can buy RollerCoaster Tycoon 1 and 2 on Steam or GOG and play them as is, but I would recommend going the extra step and getting OpenRCT2. And the last thing I played was Perfect Dark from 2000, because it came out on the Nintendo Switch Online recently, and I've been enjoying that. So Rare created this as a spiritual successor to GoldenEye, which they also made. And this game ran the N64 to its limits. You needed the expansion pack to even play it. And even then, with enough going on, you could bog down the entire system. The story mode is pretty forgettable. I went through it without much trouble. It has this weird shift between humor and serious storytelling. But even in the single player, there's stuff to do outside of the missions themselves. Like there's the firing range with weapon challenges where you learn how to use all of the weapons. And I really like that you can do the missions co-op or even counter-op, where one person is playing the mission like you would in single player and the other human player is on the opposing side trying to stop them. That was a really unique thing, and I always liked that.
Yeah, that sounds cool.
And I read somewhere that the developers were actually inspired by The Matrix for that part, because if you are on the counter-op side and you die, you just become another enemy and continue to try and stop the protagonist. And they were like, yeah, it's like The Matrix, where an agent can be anybody.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was an interesting influence. But the dedicated multiplayer mode, which is denoted as the combat simulator, is so good. That's where this game completely just blows everything else out of the water. Basically take GoldenEye and open up every possible option that the developers had access to, but you now have access to it. And they even threw in some GoldenEye levels and weapons as bonuses. You can play up to 4 people, but now you can also throw in up to 8 computer players too. And outside of just making them easier or harder, you can choose to set them with specific behaviors, like only going after the person in first, always going after the person who killed them. There's a whole bunch of different behaviors you can set. And if you're playing teams and they're on your team, you can actually direct one or all of them to act in certain ways in the match, which I did not know about as a kid. The stages are good, they're unique, they're big, they got a bunch of different paths to get around. There's a bunch of game modes besides just combat. There's a bunch of gameplay toggles to make things interesting. There's a crap load of weapons that all behave in very unique ways. And because the premise involves aliens, a lot of the guns have an excuse for being so weird and cool. I cannot think of any other first-person shooter I've played where I say, dude, reloading that gun is so badass. Now I'm looking at you, Cyclone. We got 2 of them. And within the combat simulator, there are 30 additional challenges that you can play with up to 3 people, and they serve to unlock even more stuff. I think the only downside is you have to do a lot of single-player missions and challenges to unlock stuff in the multiplayer. It would be better if all of that was unlocked from the start. But those challenges and campaign help you learn what the game has to offer and kind of teaches you how to use it. So it's not entirely a bad thing. The music is really good. I regularly listen to the soundtrack at work when I'm on a deadline, and it usually works. And it's so weird that the people who I talk to who absolutely love GoldenEye are either unfamiliar with this game or are familiar with it and said, yeah, I never checked that out. It's like GoldenEye on steroids. It's made by the same people, and they did everything much, much better. You are doing a disservice to yourself by passing on this one if you like GoldenEye.
I'm one of those people. I only had an expansion pack for a brief period of time, and at the time I didn't think it was worth it, so I got rid of it.
The expansion pack or the game?
The expansion pack. I never had the game.
Missed out.
That's what I hear from literally everything I see about it.
Yeah. And that's everything I did this month.
So next month, I will be back in the U.S. I was going to say, hopefully things will get back on track, but they haven't been on track. We're in freaking June, and our last one of these that went up was December.
We were close. We were only 3 or 4 months behind, but then we failed.
I had to go and get a job that I didn't even like on the other side of the planet, waste half of my life, or at least a few months. Feels like half of my life.
So on that positive note, thanks for watching.